Victor stood at the center of his opulent mansion, surrounded by California's elite. The champagne flowed freely as he regaled his guests with tales of financial prowess. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the room, "our latest venture has yielded a 30% return in just 3 months." The crowd murmured appreciatively, their eyes gleaming with the promise of easy wealth. Meanwhile, in a modest suburban home, Harold sat alone in front of his computer. The glow of the screen illuminated his worried face as he watched a video on financial fraud. The narrator's words sent a chill down his spine. "Beware of promises of unrealistic returns. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is." Harold's mind raced to the investment he'd made just last week. Could it be that he, a former cybersecurity expert, had fallen for a scam? Back at the mansion, Victor excused himself from the party to meet with a new investor in his study. The man, a retired doctor, handed over a check with trembling hands. "This is everything I have," he said. "Please take good care of it." Victor's smile never wavered as he assured the man of his expertise. But as he tucked the check into his desk drawer, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. The numbers weren't adding up anymore, and he knew it. Yet the thrill of the game, the adoration of his investors, and the luxurious lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to pushed any concerns aside. He returned to the party, ready to charm his next victim. Harold's fingers flew across the keyboard as he delved deeper into the world of financial fraud. He found himself on a forum where others shared stories eerily similar to his own. "Lost my life savings to Victor Invest," one user wrote. "Promised 25% returns. Now I can't even reach them." Harold's heart sank as he recognized the company name. He'd invested with them too, lured by the promise of a comfortable retirement. Determined to uncover the truth, he created an account and began connecting with other victims. Across town, Victor stood on a stage, his charisma on full display. The seminar room was packed with potential investors, their eyes wide with excitement. "Our proprietary algorithm has consistently outperformed the market," he declared, gesturing to a chart showing impossibly high returns. "And the best part? It's all automated. You invest, we do the work, and you reap the rewards." The audience hung on his every word, eager to join what seemed like a foolproof path to wealth. As they lined up to sign contracts, Victor felt a surge of confidence. He was unstoppable. Late that night, Harold received a private message on the forum. "We've been watching your posts," it read. "We're a group of hackers dedicated to exposing financial fraud. Interested in joining forces?" Harold hesitated, his ethical code as a former cybersecurity expert warring with his desire for justice. After a moment's reflection, he typed his response, "I'm in. What's the plan?" Within hours, he was on a secure video call with a group of anonymous individuals. Their faces were obscured, but their intentions were clear. "We'll need your expertise to crack Victor's system," one said. "Are you ready to bring him down?" Harold nodded, a mix of determination and apprehension coursing through him. The fight had begun. The cafe buzzed with quiet conversation as Harold nervously scanned the room. He spotted a group huddled around a corner table, laptops open and heads bent low. As he approached, a woman with vibrant blue hair looked up. "Harold," she asked. He nodded, taking a seat. "I'm Mia. Welcome to the team." The hackers quickly brought Harold up to speed on their plan. "Victor's system is sophisticated," Mia explained, "but every network has vulnerabilities." They outlined their strategy, a multi-pronged attack targeting Victor's financial records, communication channels, and offshore accounts. Harold's expertise would be crucial in navigating the cybersecurity measures he once helped design. Meanwhile, Victor sat in his plush office, scrolling through his accounts. A notification popped up, unusual activity detected in one of his offshore holdings. He frowned, then dismissed it with a click. "Probably just a glitch," he muttered, pouring himself another glass of scotch. His confidence, bolstered by years of successful manipulation, blinded him to the impending threat. Back at the cafe, the team initiated their first probe into Victor's defenses. Harold watched in awe as lines of code flashed across their screens. It was like watching a digital siege unfold. They encountered firewalls, encryption, and sophisticated alarm systems, each presenting a new challenge to overcome. "We're in," Mia announced after hours of work. They had gained access to a peripheral system, not enough to expose everything, but a crucial foothold. Harold felt a mix of exhilaration and guilt. He was breaking the law, but for a greater good. As they prepared for the next phase, he steeled himself. There was no turning back now. The hackers' headquarters hummed with tension as they launched their final assault on Victor's system. Screens flickered with rapid streams of data as they bypassed the last of his security measures. "We're in," Mia announced, her voice tight with concentration. Harold leaned forward, his heart racing as he watched years of financial records unfold before him. The truth was worse than they'd imagined. Victor's fraud extended far beyond simple Ponzi schemes. They uncovered a complex web of offshore accounts, shell companies, and manipulated financial reports. Millions of dollars flowed through this digital labyrinth, all leading back to Victor's personal accounts. "My God," Harold whispered, "he's been doing this for years." As the team worked to download and secure the incriminating data, Victor remained blissfully unaware in his mansion. His phone buzzed with a security alert, but he dismissed it without a second glance. He was too preoccupied with planning his next investor seminar, convinced that his streak of success would never end. Back at the hackers' base, the team prepared to release their findings to the world. They created a secure website, untraceable and designed to handle heavy traffic. With a few keystrokes, they uploaded all the evidence they'd gathered: financial records, emails discussing fraud, and even recordings of Victor admitting to his crimes. "It's time," Harold said, his finger hovering over the enter key. With a collective nod from the team, he pressed it. The site went live, and within minutes, social media exploded with the news. #VictorFraud began trending, and news outlets scrambled to cover the story. As the world learned of Victor's deception, Harold felt a mix of vindication and sorrow for all those who had been deceived. The media frenzy erupted with unprecedented intensity. News vans crowded outside Victor's gated mansion, reporters clamoring for a statement. Inside, Victor paced frantically, his phone buzzing incessantly with calls from panicked investors and aggressive journalists. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. "It's all lies," he shouted at his lawyer over the phone. "Find out who's behind this and shut them down." But even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. The evidence against him was overwhelming and irrefutable. Meanwhile, Harold and his team worked tirelessly to trace and recover the stolen funds. They hacked into Victor's offshore accounts, systematically transferring money back to the victims. It was a complex process, requiring careful maneuvering to avoid detection by financial authorities. "We've recovered about 60% so far," Mia reported, her eyes red from lack of sleep. Harold nodded grimly. It wasn't everything, but it was more than most victims of financial fraud ever saw again. As news of the recovery spread, victims began to gather outside the local police station. Many were elderly, their faces etched with a mix of hope and despair. Harold watched them on the news, his heart heavy with the weight of their stories. In a last-ditch effort to save himself, Victor called an emergency meeting with his top investors. "This is all a misunderstanding," he pleaded, his usual charm faltering under their accusatory glares. "Give me time, and I'll make everything right." But his words fell on deaf ears. One by one, they walked out, leaving Victor alone with the realization that his empire of lies had finally collapsed. The FBI stormed Victor's mansion at dawn, their vehicles flooding the driveway. Agents in dark suits methodically combed through every room, seizing computers, documents, and luxury items. Victor, disheveled and pale, watched in stunned silence as his life was systematically dismantled. "Mr. Chambers, you're under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and wire fraud," an agent announced, snapping handcuffs around Victor's wrists. The gravity of his situation finally sank in as he was led outside, cameras flashing in his face. Across town, Harold addressed a gathering of victims in a community center. "We've made significant progress in recovering your funds," he explained, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "But this is just the beginning. We need to stand together as we pursue justice through the legal system." The crowd listened intently, a mix of anger and hope on their faces. An elderly woman stood up, her voice quavering. "Will we get all our money back?" Harold met her gaze, wishing he could promise her everything. "We're doing our best," he replied honestly, "and we won't stop until we've recovered as much as possible." Meanwhile, Victor sat in an interrogation room, surrounded by stern-faced federal agents and his increasingly nervous lawyers. As the evidence mounted against him, his bravado crumbled. "I want to make a deal," he blurted out, desperation evident in his voice. But the prosecutors were unmoved. "Mr. Chambers, the extent of your fraud is unprecedented. There will be no deals." Victor slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation finally hitting him. His empire had fallen, and he was facing years behind bars. As night fell, Victor was led to a holding cell. Alone for the first time, he felt the full weight of his actions. Outside, the world he'd manipulated for so long moved on without him, as his victims began the long process of rebuilding their lives. Harold's phone buzzed urgently, displaying a message from Mia: emergency meeting. Victor's planning to flee. He rushed to their makeshift headquarters, heart pounding. The team huddled around screens, tracking Victor's digital footprint. He's liquidating hidden assets, Mia explained, pointing to a flurry of transactions. Looks like he's preparing for a quick getaway. Harold's jaw clenched. After all they'd done, Victor was still trying to escape justice. They devised a plan to intercept him, utilizing her hacking skills to monitor flight bookings, car rentals, and hotel reservations under known aliases. We need to alert the authorities without revealing our methods, Harold cautioned, aware of the legal tightrope they walked. Meanwhile, Victor frantically attempted to access his emergency funds. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he entered password after password, only to be met with error messages. No, 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 he muttered, panic rising in his throat. His offshore account, his lifeline, were frozen. Back at the hacker's den, a breakthrough came. Got him, exclaimed one of the team members. He's booked a private jet from a small airfield outside the city. Harold immediately relayed the information to his FBI contact, carefully omitting details of how they obtained it. As night fell, Victor threw a few belongings into a bag, constantly checking over his shoulder. He'd evaded capture before, built his empire from nothing. He could do it again. But as he reached for his car keys, doubt gnawed at him. Where could he go that they wouldn't find him? Harold and the team monitored Victor's movements through traffic cameras and GPS signals. He's on the move, Mia announced. The race was on. As Victor sped towards what he hoped was freedom, Harold coordinated with law enforcement, determined to bring him to justice once and for all. The small airport buzzed with activity as Victor's car screeched into the parking lot. He darted towards a waiting private jet, his eyes wild with desperation. Just as he reached the stairs, a fleet of FBI vehicles swarmed the tarmac, lights flashing. Victor Chambers, freeze, an agent shouted. Victor hesitated, one foot on the stairs. In that moment of indecision, Harold emerged from one of the vehicles, flanked by Mia and two other hackers. It's over, Victor, Harold called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Victor's shoulders sagged as he slowly turned to face his accusers. You don't understand, Victor pleaded, his usual charm replaced by raw fear. I was going to make it, right? I just needed more time. Harold stepped closer, his eyes locked on Victor's. Time? You've had years of destroying lives, Victor. Years of lies and theft. Do you have any idea of the pain you've caused? Victor's facade cracked. You think you're some kind of hero, he spat. You're nothing but a bitter old man who couldn't keep up with the times. No, Victor, Harold replied calmly. I'm just someone who believes in justice. And today, justice caught up with you. As the FBI agents moved in to arrest Victor, he made one last desperate attempt. Harold, listen. We can make a deal. I know things powerful people. I can make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. Harold shook his head, a mix of pity and disgust on his face. That's your problem, Victor. You still think everything has a price. Some things are worth more than money. Like integrity, like doing the right thing. Victor's face fell as the handcuffs clicked into place. As he was led away, Harold turned to Mia and the team. It's done, he said softly. Now the real work begins. They nodded, knowing that bringing Victor to justice was just the first step in making things right for his victims. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Victor's trial began. Rows of seats were filled with his victims, their faces a mix of anger, sadness, and hope for justice. Harold sat in the front row, his posture rigid with anticipation. As the proceedings began, the prosecutor laid out the case against Victor, detailing years of fraudulent activities, manipulated financial reports, and the devastating impact on thousands of lives. Victor sat at the defense table, his once impeccable suit now ill-fitting, his confident demeanor replaced by a hollow stare. Harold was called to the stand as one of the key witnesses. He took a deep breath, facing the courtroom. Victor Chambers didn't just steal our money, he began, his voice steady. He stole our trust, our security, and for many, our futures. He recounted how he discovered the fraud and the steps taken to expose it, carefully omitting any illegal activities. Victor's defense attorney attempted to discredit Harold, suggesting he was motivated by revenge. But Harold remained calm, his responses measured and backed by irrefutable evidence. Other victims took the stand, their stories painting a picture of shattered dreams and financial ruin. An elderly couple described how they lost their retirement savings. A single mother tearfully explained how she could no longer afford her child's college tuition. When it was Victor's turn to testify, he tried to employ his old charm and charisma. He spoke of market volatilities, unforeseen circumstances, and his intentions to make everything right. But under the prosecutor's skilled cross-examination, his excuses crumbled. The evidence was overwhelming, and Victor's responses became increasingly defensive and contradictory. As the trial progressed, the full extent of Victor's crimes became clear. The courtroom heard of lavish parties, luxury purchases, and offshore accounts, all funded by the hard-earned savings of trusting investors. With each revelation, Victor seemed to shrink in his seat, the weight of his actions finally bearing down on him. The judge's gavel fell with a resounding thud, silencing the courtroom. "Victor Chambers," he began, his voice grave, "you have been found guilty on all counts of fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison and order full restitution to your victims." Victor stood motionless, the color draining from his face as the reality of his sentence sank in. As he was led away in handcuffs, he caught Harold's eye for a brief moment. No words were exchanged, but the look conveyed everything: the fall of an empire, the triumph of justice, and the long road of recovery ahead for the victims. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of victims and supporters erupted in cheers as Harold emerged. Cameras flashed as he addressed the media. "Today, we've seen that no one is above the law. But our work isn't done. We'll continue to fight for full recovery of the stolen funds." In the weeks that followed, Harold worked tirelessly with legal teams and financial experts to ensure the seized assets were fairly distributed among the victims. It wasn't a complete recovery, but it was more than most had hoped for. At a community center gathering, Harold was surprised to find himself being honored by the victims. An elderly man approached him, tears in his eyes. "You gave us back our dignity," he said, shaking Harold's hand vigorously. As the event wound down, Harold found a quiet moment to reflect. He thought about Victor, now behind bars, and the countless lives affected by his greed. Then his phone buzzed with a message from Mia. "New case. Possible Ponzi scheme in Miami. You in?" Harold smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He had found his calling in protecting others from financial predators. As he typed his reply, he knew that while one battle was over, the war against fraud would continue. And he was ready for the next challenge,